Wow, that's something big. You see that big flash of silver?
Did you see that?
Yes, I did. That was like English activity or something, man.
Oh my God.
Whoa. Look out, look out, look out.
Look, we all know the ocean is full of absolute nightmares. Sharks, squid, even salmon look terrifying when they spawn, but people still chase these creatures for food, sport, or just for the thrill of reeling in something wild. Sometimes, though, the ocean will decide to serve up something completely unexpected, and that's when things get weird.
Yep, there we go, I'm on. Yes, I'm hooked up. I got a fish.
I've heard of fish stealing bait, but I wasn't ready for this one. This fish came with a bonus surprise. Now this guy in Houston is sitting by the river, enjoying the peace, when suddenly his line goes super tight. He starts reeling in what feels like a decent-sized catfish, but something feels off. The weight shifts, the fish goes crazy, and then bam, it breaks the surface. And that's when he realizes he's not the only one after it. This dude has hooked a fish, yes, but it's halfway down the throat of a snake. I get it. Losing fish to another predator is nothing new. Sharks bite trophy catches in half. Killer whales and sea lions snatch fish right off the hook. But a snake, that's a new one. And then came the fun part, having to get the lure back from its mouth. That's a whole different kind of fishing challenge. This man even managed to release both the fish and the snake back into the water like some specialist mediator. But nothing is freakier than a disembodied eyeball staring up at you from the beach. The idea of something massive lurking in the deep is already terrifying enough, but when pieces of it start washing ashore, that's when you start questioning everything. That's exactly what happened to some guy taking his morning walk on Pompano Beach in Florida. No fish, no body, just a single softball-sized eyeball sitting in the sand, still looking around like it had unfinished business. And at that moment, there would be only one thing running through my mind. What the hell did this come from? Alien, deep-sea monster, some undiscovered leviathan? Well, boringly enough, it turns out it was a swordfish. Not scary, you might think, but let's pause for a second. How did just the eye end up on the beach to begin with? What happened to the rest of the fish? And here's the real question. If swordfish are apex predators, what the hell took its eye out? That's a mystery I don't want answered. No thanks. At least with fish and sea monsters, the only thing you're risking is a missing hand. But some things you pull out of the water can actually kill you on the spot. No, I don't mean sharks or catfish with spines. I mean live explosives. That's exactly what happened to one guy in Indiana who went out fishing and instead of catching dinner, reeled in a grenade. I don't know about you, but if I ever pulled a grenade out of the water, I'd be sprinting in the opposite direction. But this guy stayed cool, called the police, and let them handle it. Where did it come from? No one knows. How did it end up in the Little Calumet River? Also a mystery. The crazy thing is, this actually happens a lot. Magnet fishers all over the world are constantly pulling up old weapons. Some places have even banned it entirely because too many people were dredging up World War II bombs. Don't go out looking for loose change like that, guys. You might accidentally end up pulling out something that could explode in your face. I've heard some wild fishing stories, but nothing beats a real-life mutant fish. Everyone has that one friend of a friend who swears they once saw a two-headed bass or a glowing, radioactive-looking eel. Usually that stuff is total nonsense. Except, sometimes it's not. The ocean is full of bizarre things, and every so often, something comes up that shouldn't exist. I'm talking about two-toned lobsters, bright blue lingcod, yes, the meat is actually blue, and albino marlin that look like ghost fish. But none of those compare to the time a charter boat in Cabo San Lucas pulled up an actual cyclops shark, one eye, dead center of its face, like something straight out of mythology. At first, people thought it had to be fake, but then marine biologists stepped in, ran the tests, and confirmed 100% real, a true, one-eyed albino shark. If anyone ever needed proof that the ocean is straight up weird, there it is. I used to think stories about ancient sea monsters were just myths, but now I'm not so sure. Ever wonder how people came up with creatures like dragons, griffins, or lake monsters? Some researchers researchers believe it all started with fossils. A giant, unexplainable bone washes up on shore, and boom, it's an instant legend. Now you're fishing an island, minding your own business, when suddenly your line pulls out a set of 6-foot-wide antlers. Tell me your first thought isn't, what in the unholy hell did I just wake up? Some ancient demon deer, a beast straight out of folklore. Turns out it was the remains of a 10,000-year-old giant elk, one of the largest deer species to ever exist. Now, it's just an interesting artifact. If someone had reeled this up 500 years ago, they would have sworn it was proof of some terrifying lake monster or a mythical creature that still lived in the depths. Ever thought the ocean might also be the place to fish for some heavy drugs? This is straight out of a crime thriller. You're out trolling, hoping to hook into a big mahi-mahi or maybe a solid tuna, when your line snags on what looks like a chunk of ocean trash. You haul it in, planning to toss it once you get back to shore, until you take a closer look. The thing's heavy, wrapped up tight, and when you crack it open, dozens of neat little bricks, perfectly packed in plastic. That's when it hits you. This isn't just some random debris. You've just reeled in $1 million drug bust. Sounds fake? Tell that to the 2 guys fishing off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, who lived it for real. They radioed the Coast Guard the second they got back into range, and before they knew it, officers were on board, securing what turned out to be nearly $1 million worth of cocaine. What if the wrong people found them before the Coast Guard did? What if they got boarded by authorities before they could explain? One minute you're looking for fish, the next you're the accidental star of a real-life drug cartel drama. And just when you think staying on the surface keeps you safe from surprises, the ocean has other ideas. You'd think deep water fish were the real weirdos, with their sharp teeth and glow-in-the-dark bodies, but topwater fishing, that's where things get really dangerous. Because sometimes the fish don't just fight, they fight back. Ever had a barracuda launch itself at you like a torpedo? Believe me, it happens. These razor-toothed speed demons are known for going after your catch before you can even get it on board. But sometimes they don't stop at the fish. There are stories of barracudas clearing the rails and landing right in the laps of unlucky anglers, snapping their jaws at anything that moves. And there are incidents when they've done this at night. And if that doesn't scare you, how about a 600-pound black marlin turning itself into a living missile? That's exactly what happened on a charter boat in Cairns, Australia, a place famous for its massive marlin fishing. One second, the angler was fighting a monster. The next, that monster was flying bill first into the cockpit, barely missing the crew. A 600-pound fish with a built-in spear coming at you full speed. That's the kind of thing that'll make you rethink your hobbies real fast. But all of that, that's just nature doing its thing. It's wild, unpredictable, but it makes sense. What doesn't make sense is when the water decides to hand you something that shouldn't be there, something that shouldn't even exist anymore. Let's talk about bones, skulls, bodies. You knew this was coming, because as scary as snakes, sharks, and giant fish are, nothing hits quite like pulling up a human skull on your fishing line. And no, I'm not talking about Halloween decorations or some prank gone wrong. I'm talking real human remains, staring up at you like zombies. 2 friends in Sweden were out on a canal, hoping for a solid pike or maybe a perch. Instead, they found themselves face to face with an eyeless skull. Not a replica, not some old animal bone. A real human skull. They called the police immediately, and before long, investigators were treating the whole thing like a murder case. Because let's be honest, when you pull a human head out of the water, someone definitely has some explaining to do. And if you think that's the worst of it, let me introduce you to the fisherman in Indonesia who thought he'd landed the winning fish in his local tournament. Turns out he'd reeled in a corpse. I'm not even making this up. I can't even imagine how freaked out he must have been. The ocean is full of mysteries, but sometimes you don't even need a fisherman to drag the weirdest stuff out of it. Sometimes the ocean does that all on its own. At first, it just looks like seaweed, maybe some washed up debris, but then you get closer and closer, and suddenly you're standing in front of thousands of jellyfish piled up in a shiny, translucent mass across the entire shoreline. That's exactly what happened in North Carolina, where beachgoers stumbled across what can only be described as a jellyfish apocalypse apocalypse on Ocracoke Island. Thousands of cannonball jellyfish, weighing about a pound each, stretching up to 10 inches wide, had all washed up at once. Nobody knew exactly why. Scientists think it had something to do with red drum larvae, which are apparently these yummy baby fish that these jellyfish love to snack on. But whatever caused it, the result was the same. A beach absolutely covered in jiggling, slimy, pulsating sea creatures. I don't know about you, but I'll be thinking twice the next time I cast a line. Here's something fun and weird for you. A tiny shark turned up on Southbourne Beach in Bournemouth, England, and it wasn't just any ordinary find. It looked like a thresher shark, but the weird thing was, it was likely aborted before birth. At just 3 feet long, it was smaller than a typical newborn, and since it didn't have claspers, it was definitely female. But the real mystery? It had no front teeth and no growth rings in its vertebrae, meaning it never fully developed. Shark moms sometimes abort their babies when they're super stressed, so researchers think this one might have been lost after the mother got caught by fishermen. Now, if you thought a baby shark washing up was odd, how about a beach full of what can only be described as penis fish? In December 2019, thousands of pink, wriggly, phallic-shaped creatures suddenly appeared on Drake's Beach in California. Officially called fat innkeeper worms, these guys usually live underground, trapping food with a mucus net. Yeah, it gets grosser, but a strong storm messed up their burrows and dumped them right out in the open, leaving beachgoers very confused and probably very uncomfortable. Not to be outdone, Penzance Beach in Cornwall, UK had its own bizarre invasion in August 2018. Instead of penis fish, they got sea potatoes. Yep, the beach was covered in little round, tennis ball-sized creatures, also called heart urchins. But that's way less fun. These guys normally stay buried in the sand, but experts think a storm disrupted a mass breeding event, sending them tumbling onto shore. If I was heading to the beach expecting a nice day, and instead stepping onto a carpet of weird, spiky potatoes, I would just go home and never step back out again. Speaking of weird beach mysteries, in May 2017, South Africa had a shark problem. 3 massive great whites washed up dead, which is weird enough, but then scientists noticed something even stranger. All of them were missing their livers, and one was even missing its heart. Cue the scary music. Turns out the culprits were orcas. These super smart ocean hunters are known for surgically removing shark livers because they're packed with nutrients and fat. Somehow, these orcas managed to get into the sharks' bodies, take exactly what they wanted, and leave the rest. Kind of terrifying, honestly. Then there was this oarfish that washed up on Catalina Island in California back in June 2015. And I have to say, I'm obsessed with these things. Oarfish are long, ribbon-like creatures that usually live deep underwater, so when one shows up at the surface, it's a big deal. This one was 13.5 feet long, and scientists were pumped to study it up close. But the craziest part? Its ovaries were 7 feet long and weighed 24 pounds. That's an insane amount of potential baby oarfish inside one fish. I can't even wrap my head around it. Makes me wonder how many of these things are lurking in the deep, completely hidden from us. But hands down, one of the weirdest things to ever wash ashore was this completely white, 33-foot-long humpback whale. A kayaker in Victoria, Australia, found it on a remote beach, and at first people thought it was a statue because of how pale it was. It didn't even look real. Scientists don't think it had true albinism since there were some darker patches of skin, but it might have had leucism, which messes with pigmentation. Another theory was that the outer layer of skin peeled off during decomposition, revealing a lighter layer underneath. Yeah, either way, I'm really not interested in investigating further. Next, so far I feel like nothing has been even remotely as disturbing as what happened on Vancouver Island in 2020. Several sea lions were found decapitated, and the creepiest part, their heads were placed neatly next to their bodies. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like the work of scavengers. Marine experts agreed, saying it was likely the result of human involvement, though no one really knows if the animals were killed or if someone just took their heads after they died. Either way, it's unsettling, and to this day, no one has figured out exactly what happened. Now, onto some creatures we hope we never run into in or even around the ocean. Seriously, what even are these? First up, the gulper eel. This thing is fairly normal looking for a deep-sea fish until it decides it's time to eat. Then, its mouth stretches way out, inflating like some disgusting balloon. It's also called the pelican eel because of that massive pouch of a mouth, which it uses to scoop up prey along with a bunch of water. Once it's got something in its jaws, it lets the water drain out through its gills and swallows the unlucky crustacean, fish, or squid. But not all deep-sea creatures are terrifying. Take the bloody belly comb jelly, for example. It may have a name that sounds freaky, but it's actually gorgeous. Picture a heart-shaped, deep red jellyfish that glides through the water, its tiny hair-like cilia reflecting light to create a rainbow sparkle effect. It's basically the disco ball of the deep sea, and that blood-red color, it actually helps it blend in. Since red light doesn't travel well underwater, the jelly practically disappears in the deep, making it harder for predators to spot. Even cooler, scientists think its red belly helps hide the glow of bioluminescent prey it eats. Then there's the emperor shrimp, which is hands down one of the flashiest creatures in the ocean. These tiny shrimp are decked out in the wild, clashing colors in clusters of bright oranges, purples, and whites that make them stand out in the best way possible. But despite their bold looks, they're not exactly the independent type. Instead of swimming around on their own, they spend their whole lives hitching rides on the backs of sea slugs. It's a pretty good deal. The shrimp gets protection from predators since the slug's body is full of toxins, and in return, it keeps its host nice and clean. Basically, the shrimp gets free transportation, free security, and free food. Not a bad gig. Now, if you're looking for something to scare the crap out of you, meet the bobbit worm. This creature is an absolute menace. It can grow up to 3 meters long and spends its life buried in the ocean floor, waiting for unsuspecting prey to swim by. All you'll see sticking out of the sand are a few tentacle-like antennae, but the second a fish gets too close, bam! The worm launches out at lightning speed, clamping down with its razor-sharp jaws. It's so fast and so powerful that it can actually slice its prey in half. If I were a fish, this is the last thing I'd ever want to run into. Speaking of scary sea insects I don't want to run into, let's talk about giant isopods. This thing is like a woodlouse, the kind you see crawling under rocks in your backyard, except make that a full foot long and have it living at the bottom of the ocean. That's a giant isopod. These armored, prehistoric-looking creatures lurk around 500 meters below the surface, scavenging whatever they can find. They're not picky eaters. They'll take dead fish, crab remains, marine worms, whatever happens to sink down there. They look like they belong in some kind of deep-sea monster game, but thankfully, they're just slow-moving bottom feeders. Even I could outrun them. And then, just to completely switch things up, we have sea angels. These things are the complete opposite of bobbit worms and giant isopods. Sea angels are tiny, delicate, and look more like floating jelly-winged spirits than actual animals. They've evolved from gastropods, basically sea snails, but instead of crawling around, they've ditched their shells and use wing-like fins to gracefully flap through the water. Watching them move is honestly mesmerizing. But don't let the name fool you, because these little guys are actually ruthless predators. Their favorite food? Other swimming snails. They use tiny tentacles to grab their prey, pull them out of their shells, and devour them. Not exactly the peaceful, angelic vibe you'd expect. And with changing ocean conditions threatening their food supply, sea angels might be in trouble, which would be a real shame because they're one of the most beautiful creatures out there. There's something oddly charming about tiny sea slugs, and the Dotto greenemieri is no exception. This little guy was only discovered in 2015, and it's about the size of a fingertip. At first first glance, it looks like it's covered in a bunch of tiny eyes, but those aren't eyes at all. They're chirata or finger-like structures that work as both gills and a way to store toxins. Basically, it's got built-in chemical weapons, and its bright colors are a warning to any predator thinking about making a snack out of it. Fun fact, some people think it looks like a stack of pancakes or a honey drizzler. Personally, I'm not sure whether that makes it cuter or weirder. Speaking of weird, let's talk about the giant siphonophore. If you've ever seen silly strings sprayed underwater, that's basically what this thing looks like. But it's not one stringy creature. It's actually a colony of tiny organisms, each with its own specific job. Some catch food, some digest it, and some handle reproduction. When they all work together, they create this massive, stringy, alien-looking creature that can grow over 40 meters long. That's longer than a blue whale. The ocean really doesn't hold back when it comes to bizarre life forms. Now, if you ever wanted proof that worms can get even more gross than they already are, meet the polychaete worms. These bristle-covered creatures look like something straight out of a sci-fi scary movie, but they're completely real. They live near hydrothermal vents, where the water is basically boiling, and yet they're thriving. Those hairy-looking bristles, they're actually sensory organs, helping the worms navigate their extreme environment. And with over 10,000 species of polychaetes out there, they come in a crazy variety of shapes and sizes. Some are tiny and harmless. The others, well, I don't want to get into it. But if we're talking about creepy creatures, Johnson's abyssal sea devil definitely makes the list. This thing is your classic anglerfish, tiny, terrifying, and looking like it just saw a ghost. It's got those classic deep-sea predator traits: razor-sharp teeth, a stomach that stretches to swallow prey bigger than itself, and of course, the creepy glowing lure dangling between its eyes. Unlike fast, aggressive hunters, anglerfish are all about patience. They just hang there in the dark, using their built-in fishing rod to lure in unsuspecting prey. One wrong move, and snap, it's over. And here's where things get even weirder. In some species, the males are basically just tiny, useless parasites. Instead of living normal lives, they latch onto a female, fuse into her body, and slowly dissolve into nothing but reproductive organs. That's right, you heard me. The male just becomes a permanent, living sperm bank, relying entirely on the female for nutrients. If that's not the ultimate mooching off your partner situation, I don't know what is. Now, let's head even deeper, way down into the blackest depths of the ocean, where the vampire squid lurks. Despite the name, it's not actually a squid, and it definitely doesn't drink blood. Its full scientific name, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, literally means vampire squid from hell, which is dramatic but kind of fitting. With its deep red color, cloak-like webbing between its arms, and creepy bioluminescence, it definitely gives off sinister vibes, but in reality, it's pretty harmless. Instead of being a fearsome predator, it just floats around, eating tiny bits of organic debris that drift down from the upper ocean. Not exactly the monster its name suggests, but still one of the weirdest looking things down there. And just when you think the ocean can't get any more surreal, enter the Magnapinna squid. If you've never heard of this one, you're not alone. It's so rare that only about a dozen have ever been spotted. But when one does appear, it's impossible to forget. Picture a squid with massive fins and freakishly long, thin tentacles that dangle like ghostly strands in the deep. These things have been recorded at depths of over 20,000 feet, making them one of the most mysterious creatures in the ocean. Scientists still don't know much about them, but honestly, that only makes them even more unsettling. If aliens exist on Earth, this might be what they look like. Now I gotta talk about one of the weirdest sharks out there, the angel shark. If you've never seen one, it's basically a regular shark that got completely flattened, like it lost a fight with a steamroller. But that squish shape is actually a superpower. Angel sharks spend most of their time buried under the sand, totally camouflaged, just waiting for some unlucky fish to swim by. And when that happens, they explode out of the sand in an instant, grabbing their prey before it even knows what hit it. Honestly, it's kind of terrifying, but also really impressive. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we've got the flapjack octopus, which might be one of the cutest things to ever exist. It's this tiny, round octopus with big eyes and little fins on its head that make it look like it has ears. And the way it moves, absolute gold. It flaps its fins and pulses its stubby arms like a jellyfish, just wobbling around the deep sea. The name flapjack comes from how it just kind of flattens out on the ocean floor like a squishy pancake when it's resting. It doesn't have an ink sac and it can't change colors like other octopuses, but let's be real, who's gonna attack something this adorable? Up next, the Japanese spider crab needs to be a part of this video. If you're not a fan of spiders, you might want to skip this one because these guys look exactly like giant sea spiders. And when I say giant, I mean massive, like their legs can stretch up to 12 feet across. But despite their terrifying appearance, they're actually just scavengers, shuffling along the seafloor looking for dead stuff to eat. And get this, baby spider crabs sometimes cover themselves in sponges or seaweed, like they're playing dress-up, probably to avoid getting eaten. Even the ocean's creepiest creatures have a little fashion sense, I guess. Speaking of strange deep-sea creatures, let me introduce you to sea pigs. If a sea cucumber and a pig had a baby, somehow, this is what you'd get. These little pink blobs live miles below the ocean's surface, just crawling along the seafloor in huge herds. And the way they move, bizarre. Instead of normal legs, they use these inflatable, water-filled tubes, basically like tiny built-in hydraulics. And as they waddle along, they stir up the mud, kicking up bits of dead plants and animals to snack on. Honestly, they look like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But hey, they make it work. Now, if the flapjack octopus wasn't cute enough for you, let me introduce you to the Dumbo octopus. Yep, it's named after the Disney elephant, and for good reason. It's got these adorable little ear-like fins that make it look like it's flying through the water. And this little guy is hardcore. In 2019, one was spotted nearly 7 kilometers down in the Java Trench, making it the deepest living octopus ever recorded. Despite living in total darkness, it just glides through the deep sea like a little ghost. Easily one of my favorite deep sea creatures. Okay, so the giant larvacean might not be as cute, but it is one of the most ridiculous architects in the ocean. It's only about 4 inches long, but it builds these massive, intricate houses made entirely of mucus. Yeah, you heard me. Snot mansions. The gooey structure, which can be 3 feet wide, acts like a giant filter, catching tiny food particles that drift through the water. And when the house gets clogged up, it just ditches the whole thing and builds a new one. The old slimy mess then sinks to the ocean floor, where other deep-sea creatures snack on it. It's kinda gross, but also genius. And last but definitely not least, we have the leaf sheep sea slug. This little guy is so ridiculously cute. It looks like a tiny cartoon sheep with leaf-like appendages all over its back. But here's where things get strange. This thing photosynthesizes like a plant. No joke. It munches on algae, steals the chloroplasts, the part of the plant that turns sunlight into energy, and then uses them to make its own food. Basically, it's a solar-powered slug. If that's not one of the most incredible life hacks in the animal kingdom, I don't know what is. I could talk about these weird and wonderful creatures all day, but that's the end of today's video. Which one of these do you wish you had never learned about? Ever gone fishing and caught something really strange I should know about?